Watch this alone, if you dare. True stories scarier than horror movies. Story 1. A very close friend of the family who spent many years emotionally adopted by my parents before getting divorced and moving away, was working as a housekeeper to provide for her son. One night at work, she witnessed two men shoot someone, and afraid she would call the police, they forced her into her car and drove away. That happened the night before my birthday. She was missing for a few days since the police only found her empty car. There was really unfortunate press from the local police that she had run away, but she would never ever leave her son. He had special needs and he was really her entire life. She woke up in the morning for him and would have never left him to anyone else, not even family. After reporting her missing, the police said they had already found her. Those two cowards had driven her to a farm outside of town and killed her, leaving her there alone behind a barn. They didn't even know that the man they shot had survived, made it to the hospital, and gave a witness statement to everything. One of the murderers was caught right away, and the police found his accomplice trying to hide in the attic. I lost contact with her family, so I don't know what came of their criminal trial in August. But I still get so overwhelmed with grief thinking about how the news reported the incident. Everything that she was, as a mother, as a friend, as a human being. In her last acknowledgments on Earth, she was just Moleshoe Woman. That's really scary to me. Story 2. It was 3 a.m. I was working at a popular Canadian coffee shop. There was one old baker in the back that rarely interacted with me, past a dirty joke or a dirtier ditty from his Navy days. Other than that, I'm alone, not another soul around the area, and I expect it to remain so for at least an hour yet. I'm boxing up the day-olds for the homeless shelter when I swear I see something out of the corner of my eye. It's behind me. I turn then, look down. There's a small child standing there, a native little toddler with a faux hawk staring at me intensely. I'm struck dumb with how absurd the situation is. How did he get behind the counter? I didn't hear the door open or see him come through the counter. I scan the storefront, no one. I yell for the baker in case he has a friend or something visiting that lost their kid. He comes over and, like me, does a double take at the kid and is baffled. The kid starts muttering incoherently. I get him a glass of water and a donut hole, and the baker runs out of the store to do a perimeter of the block. I call the non-emergency line and explain I have a little kid with no parents. I can't get any information from the boy, just mumbles. I can't make out. Police arrive. The baker comes back and says that he can't find anyone else in the streets. The guy from the 24/7 corner store said he'll keep an eye out. The police try to speak to the kid and also get nothing but mutterings and half-hearted gestures. They take him away. I see them again for their morning coffee, and they told me the little guy walked several kilometers from the nearest reservation in the dead of night to my store. He had got into his parents' medicine cabinet and just walked out of the house. I'm floored. It must have taken that poor baby hours to get to me. Seeing him behind me like that in the dead of the night still shakes me. It spooked me more than the guy that threw a pot of coffee at me, the woman that tried to stab me with a plastic spoon because I refused to give her a metal one, and the dude that waited around for 4 hours hoping to catch me alone so he could teach me a lesson since I didn't have the flavor of bagel he wanted. Story 3. I live in a small town in New Zealand. My big sister and I used to wait outside the back gates of our primary school for our mom to pick us up and walk us home after school. It was quieter at the back gates, and my mom has always been terrible with time management, so she was often late coming to get us. One day, a man in a van drove up and parked on the curb where we were standing and waiting. It was one of the days when our mom was late to get us, so there wasn't anybody around. He started asking us to get into his van, cajoling and joking, and then getting irritated. My sister, who at the time must have been 7, 8 years old, I would have been 5 years old, refused politely, saying she didn't know him and that we weren't supposed to speak to strangers. Luckily, our mom came back in time, and when he saw her coming, he drove off. I have no memory of it at all, but it freaks me out all the same. My mom spent some of her childhood in Saudi Arabia. Her father worked as an engineer for an airline company and was making some good money. They moved to NZ after a few years in Saudi. My mom told me a few stories about how she and her dad would be walking in the markets together when soldiers would come along and herd people up to attend executions in the local stadium. Her dad would always bundle her up into a store and hide around the back so they wouldn't be herded up with the local population. One day in the market, she also told me that the soldiers detained a foreign woman whose hair had been showing from underneath her headscarf. They made her kneel in front of everybody and cut her hair unevenly, causing injury. Story 4. I live in Costa Rica, and about a year ago, two Danish tourist girls in their late teens took a ride back to their hotel from a bar in town. It was about 8 p.m., so not late. The tuk-tuk driver turned off the road and led the girls down a secluded path to a deserted piece of beach. A whole load of his buddies was waiting there. They attacked the girls repeatedly until 4 in the morning when they left them for dead on the beach. One managed to get up, and in her fright and shock, she ran naked into the jungle and got lost. They didn't find her until after midday the next day, suffering from exhaustion and dehydration on top of her considerable injuries. The other one made it up onto the main road and stumbled into a cafe where they called the police. What's worse is the police showed up and didn't take her seriously, saying that she was probably intoxicated, and it was her own fault. The local population was up in arms and subsequently boycotted the tuk-tuks. There were demonstrations, and eventually the police confiscated all the tuk-tuks and sent more police to the area. We now have a new police station. The previous one was a broken-down old bus with 2 outside toilets with bars on them for holding cells, and there has been a crackdown on violence in the area. Typically, though, the gang that attacked these poor girls was never apprehended, despite it being common knowledge in town who it was. Story 5. My parents were always protective of me and my sister, especially in parking lots. As I got older, I started to question why they were like that, since we lived in a pretty good city and didn't even go to places that could be remotely that dangerous. Well, it turns out they have 2 cases of almost being abducted in parking lots, one together, and just my mom alone. My mom's case was the most intense. If I remember correctly, she was leaving her or a friend's house, walking up to her car when a guy approached her. She spared me the details, but somehow he got her blindfolded on her own passenger seat, made a bunch of threats, and drove them to a gas station. Meanwhile, she was pleading for him to not touch her, to take her car, her money, but do nothing to her. At the gas station, he got out of the car, telling my mom not to take the blindfold off or he would harm her. Somehow she mustered up the courage to take it off, jump to the driver's seat, and drive the heck away from there. She shook and cried all the way home, called. My dad explained what happened and asked him to wait for her in front of her house. Just now I realize how strong of a woman she is, because when she got there, my father insisted on carrying her inside. But she refused and said there is no need for it. To this day, she hates to stay too long in parking lots, always gets more attentive when we park at night. And one of the first things she told me when I started diving was to get in and out of there quickly. Story 6. I used to hang out in a field near some forests when I was younger. One time it was about midnight, and one of my friends had recently had some love triangle type of trouble, and the other guy involved wanted to fight him quite badly. Somehow he found out where my friend liked to hang out and rounded up about 10 of his friends to come to find him, and I'm guessing beat him soundly. I unfortunately happened to be there too. We saw about 4 cars park up on the road near the field and about 10 guys get out. I'm guessing they saw one of our phone lights, because the next thing we knew, they shined what I could only describe as an industrial flashlight towards us. We just hear he's right there. So we ran into the forest at 12 at night in the pitch black. It started to pour rain. For an hour we hid in bushes and crept around the forest, avoiding them as light from their torches shone through the trees. At times they'd walk right past us, but were not able to see us because we were face down in the bushes and mud. I was the victim of a manhunt, and it was terrifying. I got home at about 2 a.m. soaking and covered in mud. They never caught us though. All over a love triangle I wasn't bloody involved in. Story 7. I used to live in Utah near Skinwalker Ranch. Not on the reservation close, but next to the reservation. When we first moved there, it was run by the military, I was told. I don't know if this is true because it is privately owned now. My dad thought it would be funny to take me and my mom out to the roadblocks and turn around. He spent the evening hyping it up, and I like scary stuff and it sounded fun. I was also a minor and didn't think we would get in trouble. We load up in my parents' flat green Jeep with a star painted on it. It was the logo for a body shop of my dad's best friend. We go out there, get to the roadblocks, and have spotlights shined in the car and dogs chasing it. We stop, and as soon as the light hits the star, the lights turn off and the dogs are called. We turned around when no one came up to the car and laughed about how that could have gone bad. We go home and go to bed. My room was in the basement, which was a walkout. I also had a parakeet named Kai. Early in the morning, Kai is freaking out in my room, squawking and chattering, and won't stop even after I put a blanket over him. I couldn't sleep and had school, so I put him in the den, which is just outside my bedroom door and is the same room with the walkout door. I go back to bed and wake up to get ready for school. I go into the den, take the blanket off Kai, and go upstairs to get ready. I come down 15 minutes later and Kai's gone. His cage is open, so I ask my brother who is the only other person in the basement. He was still asleep and didn't touch him. I look for him and cannot find him anywhere. I ask my sisters and mom if they have him or let him out. Nope. I start panicking because I found a drop of blood by the walkout, and the door, which is normally locked, isn't anymore and is slightly open. I never found Kai. I looked everywhere outside and put his cage out. I never even hear him whistle or mimic. Somehow in 15 minutes, the basement door was opened as well as his cage. The door on his cage that opened had to be pinched and pulled, and he was eaten, taken. My family says the skinwalker needed new skin and took him. I am still heartbroken. My sweet blue boy is gone. Story 8 years ago, when I was still in school, my mom and sister had gone out of town to my cousin's graduation. I'd elected to stay home and hang out with my dad and have a guy's weekend in. He bought steaks, we rented movies, chilled out, and talked about wrestling, etc. Everything was going great. Until that night, Dad brought out a Ouija board and told me a story of how he and my mom had used one years ago, before either I or my sister had come along. Two things bothered me about this. The first was that I didn't believe it would work, and him insisting that it did made me think he was just messing with me as a joke. My dad could be a real smart aleck when he wanted to be, and wasn't above pulling someone's leg for a laugh. The second was back in the day. He was a Sunday school teacher, and I grew up a church kid. I didn't understand the logic of him wanting to fool around with something like this, which only led me to believe he was kidding with me. So it's nighttime. There's no light on, but a little over the stove light in the kitchen. We sat at the table and he showed me what to do. After a few minutes of nothing, I got bored and decided to give up. With a thanks but no thanks, I went into the living room to watch TV. He kept going with it, telling me that it would work. I waved it off and wondered to myself how long he'd keep up the gag. A few minutes passed and I saw him get up from the table, holding the board in both hands and violently smashing it in half over his knee. Before I could get up, he smashed it again and shoved the busted pieces into the trash, pulled the bag out, and took it outside into the garbage bin. When he came back in, he didn't say a word about what had happened, and I knew better than to try and drag it out of him. I never told my mom or anyone else out of fear it would stir up trouble. He lived another 14, 15 years after that into his 70s, and we never spoke of it again. Story 9. My name is Michael, and I'm a 14-year-old boy who lives with my aunt in the countryside. Now out here we have no neighbors. The closest place to my house is about 8 miles away. I always loved living out here because I've always liked the seclusion, and the road we live by is always dead at night, which makes for a good sleep. Now my aunt is always working the night shift, so this means I would be home alone pretty much every night. Long story short, I came home from school on a relatively crappy day, thunderstorms and rain all day and all night, and spent my day playing video games and Snapchatting my friends. At about 9 o'clock, my aunt came upstairs and told me she was heading off to her job. I was always fine with this because I liked being home alone. I had full range of the house and could play loud music all I wanted. Who wouldn't love it? At about 11 o'clock, I started feeling tired and laid down to watch some YouTube and go to sleep. And soon enough, I did. I woke up at some odd hour of the night to somebody knocking on the door. I sat up and muttered what the heck I thought my aunt had gotten home from the night shift, and reluctantly went to go answer the door, and out of habit checked the window beside the door to make sure it was her. But there was nobody there. I thought to myself, probably some silly kids knocking on my door and running away, and I dismissed it at that and went back into my room. I checked my phone to realize it was 3 a.m., and the thought of teenagers ding-dong ditching my home was suddenly out of the question, given that it was a Wednesday and I basically lived in the middle of nowhere. Just as I was thinking, I heard a bang coming from the basement. I jumped and tried to make up an excuse like a noise of the thunderstorm to calm me down. We always kept our basement door locked anyway, out of my aunt's paranoia and fear of someone breaking in. That's when I heard footsteps slowly creaking up the old wooden stairs in my basement. Frozen with fear, I grabbed my phone and called 911. The operator told me to go to an upstairs room in the house and grab a weapon to defend myself. But there was no way I was going to grab a knife from the kitchen, especially when I heard the door being slammed and quickly realized that someone was trying to bust it down. I jumped from my bed and quietly closed my door and hid in my closet like the 911 operator had told me to do. This was easily the scariest moment of my life, but suddenly the banging stopped. But what comes next will haunt me for my whole life. Whoever it was screamed at the top of their lungs, but it wasn't a normal scream. It was an intense and unsettling scream. And then I heard the basement door fall. Now he was full out screaming as he sprinted up the stairs. He went through all the rooms down the upstairs hallway, still screaming, until he reached mine. My door, unfortunately, didn't have a lock on it, and when I heard him open my door, I was paralyzed with fear. I could see him through the shades of my closet. He was still screaming, looking all over my room, even under my bed. But then, after trying to hold my breath for too long, I let out a puff of air. He perked up, looked straight at my closet, and slowly walked towards it, no longer screaming. I couldn't even breathe at the moment, especially when he just stopped right in front of the closet door. I could see him through the closet, and he had the biggest smile I had ever seen. As soon as he slowly reached for the closet doorknob, there was a loud bang at the door and somebody yelling, "Police." The man quickly ran and tried to run out my window but failed. As soon as I saw the police tackle him, I instantly ran out of the closet and outside, now realizing that was a stupid move on my part. After a couple of minutes, I saw the police bring the man out in cuffs. But on the way to the car, he stared at me with the biggest smile and the craziest eyes I had ever seen. Watching him ride away with the police was the greatest moment of my life. But what still haunts me today is the face he made as he stood in front of my closet door ready to do something horrible. Story 10. My girlfriend talks in her sleep. At first it was cute and hilarious to tell her what she said. It was harmless nonsense like the sky is folding or we need to raise the ground. We'd talk the next day about if she remembered her dream, but she never did. I wish I knew what she meant by "we need to raise the ground." For some context, our nightly routine is for us to start out cuddling and then give up once it gets too hot. Then we're usually both on our sides back to back. She would fall asleep before I do, and so I would hear the full range of her nightly musings. Honestly, at first I was eager to hear what she said. It was always funny to tell her and our friends what she would say while deep in the throes of REM. But now I'm done. I'd prefer she not talk anymore. How am I going to sleep after what happened last night? Last night around 11 p.m., she was asleep and I was still up reading. Back to back, I heard her mumble something under her breath. I couldn't quite make out what she said, but I leaned over from my book to peek at her face, and she was sleeping soundly. I returned to my book and got absorbed back into its pages. At some point, I fell asleep. Next thing I know, I'm woken up by my girlfriend talking at full volume. I open my eyes, and at some point in the night, both of us have turned to lay face to face. My girlfriend's eyes are wide open. She is staring right at me mere inches from my face, but her eyes are vacuous, like she is looking through me. These eyes, man, it's like she was straining to widen them as much as possible. Those are the eyes I fell in love with, and right now they are scaring the absolute daylight out of me. My heart rate skyrockets and chock full of adrenaline. I throw off the covers and jump out of bed. Looking at her, her eyes follow me like a painting, but her body stays still. For 1 second, I decided that my book light was keeping her awake, and what she had said was, "Can you please turn that off?" Now, out of bed and looking at her, she's not right. Her body hasn't moved, but her eyes dart from looking at me to looking around the room. I dare to ask her, "Are you all right?" No response. Those eyes look at me when I speak, though. They are now deadlocked, looking right into my eyes. Her breathing hasn't changed. That is a sleep breathing for sure. That's when, while looking right at me, she says in a too-deep voice, "Come back to bed, dearie." My girlfriend has never called me dearie before. We have pet names, sure, but they range from Pumpkin Baby to Cupcake. Dearie sounds like something my grandmother would call me. I decide I'll get more information before I climb back into bed with a potentially possessed girlfriend. "Are you awake, sweetie?" No response. The eyes dart from me to the wall, to the door, and then the ceiling. I'm about to leave the room when her wide-open eyes roll to the back of her head. The white from those eyes stands out in the dim radiance of the booklight. "No pupils in sight," she insists. Of course I'm awake. Come back to bed, with a subtle tap of the fingers on the comforter. Looking at her fingers now, I'm starting to come around. She's never sleepwalked before. Surely she is awake now if she's moving her hands. But looking at her fingers, it's as though she is pretending to have control. They are all going in different directions. One finger pointing straight down and the others to the side. Those hands are not my girlfriend's hands. They are simulating normal movement as best they can, though. I say I'm going to get a drink of water, baby. Be right back. Can I get you anything, fully planning to run out of the house the moment I'm over the threshold? But my normally agreeable and sweet girlfriend decides I'm not allowed to leave, as serious as cancer. She says in that too deep horror voice, "Take one step out of that door, and I will hurt you severely." Shocked but understanding the importance of not letting this beast know I am in trouble, I reply, as interesting as a proposition as that is, I think I'm going to. And, thinking quickly, I grab my water bottle from the nightstand. This doesn't please my girlfriend, as she decides to start screaming and crawling her way towards me. It is a supernatural scream, so high-pitched and bird-like that I feel as though my neighbors 3 houses down were going to ask us if they heard that last night. As fast as I can muster, I unscrew the lid and douse her in water. Like I knew what I was doing, her eyes close, her garbled appendages normalize, and she is back asleep. I'm going to sleep on the couch for a while, maybe forever. She'll understand when she's awake. Story 11. In the early 2000s, kids didn't usually carry cell phones. My brother was in elementary school, no older than 10. He was supposed to get home from school on the bus at around 3:30 in the afternoon. The bus stop was a few blocks away and around a corner, so we couldn't see it from our house. One day, the other kids came walking up the street, but not my brother. My parents were confused, but not immediately concerned. My brother was easily distracted and might have gotten sidetracked with a friend or with stacking rocks and sticks down the road. But 3:35, then 3:40, then 3:50 came and went, and there was still no sign of him. So my parents started to worry. My mom went next door to talk to one of the kids who came home on the bus that was supposed to hold my brother. Meanwhile, my dad took his motorcycle down to the bus stop to see if he encountered my brother along the way. When they both got back, they reported the kids said that they'd see my brother get on the bus, but weren't sitting with him and had been engaged in talking to other friends. So they couldn't say with certainty whether or not my brother got off the bus. My dad said there was no sign of him either on the road to the bus stop or in the immediately surrounding neighborhood. He was gone. Time to panic. It being so long ago, I no longer remember the exact details of the rest of the story. I know that my parents called the school and were told that no more students were on campus. I remember my mother crying and my dad yelling at the administrator for losing his son. I remember thinking that the last exchange I had with my brother was a fight over something silly. Then the phone rang again. It was my brother from the school safe. He had fallen asleep on the bus and missed his stop. He woke shortly after that before the next stop and asked to get off. But rather than allowing him to, on his word and the words of the rest of the kids, the substitute bus driver forbade him from leaving at a stop that wasn't his. How would that fool have known anyway? And made him stay on the bus until it returned to the depot at the elementary school almost an hour after he was supposed to be home. My parents weren't happy. The school tried to deflect blame. My brother got home safely and that driver was temporarily suspended. It had a happy ending, but sometimes I still have nightmares that it didn't. Story 12. I was born and raised in a little town called Maplewood, Pennsylvania. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and life was simple. My dad was a mechanic and my mom ran the only grocery store in town. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. Growing up, I was just like any other kid, curious, always exploring the woods near our house, getting into trouble here and there. But what really got me were the stories the old folks in town would tell, ghost stories, mostly haunted houses, creatures in the woods, that sort of thing. I loved hearing them, but I never really believed in any of it. Fast forward a few years, and I'm in my early 20s trying to figure out what to do with my life. There weren't many jobs in Maplewood, so I ended up taking a job as a security guard at St. Mary's Hospital in the city. It was a pretty old building built way back in the early 1900s. The place had history, that's for sure. The walls seemed to whisper secrets, and sometimes late at night you could hear strange noises echoing through the empty halls. I didn't pay much attention to it, though. I figured it was just the building settling, or maybe a rat scurrying around. My job was mostly uneventful. I worked the night shift, so it was pretty quiet. I'd make my rounds, check the doors, make sure everything was locked up. It wasn't exactly thrilling, but it paid the bills. Most nights I was alone in those long, dimly lit corridors. The place had a way of playing tricks on your mind. The shadows seemed to move when you weren't looking, and sometimes I'd hear faint whispers, but I always shrugged it off. I told myself it was just the wind or my imagination. But then came that night, the night that changed everything. It was a cold, rainy night, one of those nights where the wind howls and the rain pelts against the windows like it's trying to get in. I was making my rounds just like any other night when I heard it. A faint noise coming from one of the old deserted wings of the hospital. The east wing, if I remember right. That part of the building hadn't been used in years, not since they'd moved most of the patients to the newer section. At first I thought it was just the wind, but as I got closer, I realized it was something else. It sounded like footsteps, slow and dragging, like someone was shuffling across the floor. My heart started pounding in my chest, but I told myself it was probably just a homeless person who'd somehow gotten inside. It wouldn't have been the first time I followed the noise down the hallway, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. The air was cold, colder than it should have been, and there was this smell like something rotten. When I turned the corner, I saw her. She was standing at the end of the hallway, her back to me. She was wearing a hospital gown, the kind they give patients, but something was off. Her legs were all wrong. They were bent backward, twisted in a way that shouldn't have been possible. I froze, my heart in my throat. For a moment, I thought it was just a trick of the light, or maybe I was seeing things, but then she turned around. I'll never forget what I saw. Her eyes. They were black, completely black, like there was nothing there but darkness. And that smile, it was distorted, as if her face was forced into a grin. But the worst part was the way she moved. She didn't walk. She ran, her twisted legs carrying her toward me, faster than anything human should be able to move. I didn't think, I just turned and ran. I could hear her behind me, those awful twisted legs slapping against the floor. But the sound was wrong, like bones breaking with each step. The lights flickered above me as I ran, and I could feel her getting closer, her breath cold against my neck. I wanted to look back to see how close she was, but I knew if I did, I wouldn't make it out of there. I ran faster than I ever thought I could, my feet pounding against the tiles as I raced toward the main entrance. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let her catch me. Just as I reached the doors, I heard a scream, a high-pitched, terrifying scream that echoed through the hallway. I don't know if it was her or me, but it was enough to push me through those doors and out into the cold night. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything went silent. The footsteps stopped, the lights stopped flickering, and the cold, oppressive feeling that had been pressing down on me vanished. I stood there gasping for breath, staring back at the hospital. She was gone, but I knew she was still there, hiding in the shadows, waiting. I quit the next morning. I told my boss I couldn't do it anymore, and I packed up and went back to Maplewood. I never told anyone what happened that night, not really. I mean, who would believe me? But I can still feel her eyes on me even now, like she's watching, waiting for the right moment to come back. I don't go back to the city much anymore, and I stay away from hospitals whenever I can. But every now and then, when the wind howls just right, or when I'm alone at night, I think about her, about what I saw, and about how close I came to never making it out of that hospital. And I wonder if she's still there, haunting those halls, waiting for the next poor soul to come across her path. Story 13. I worked the night shift at a large grocery store. One that wasn't open overnight, but had a skeleton crew to work the loads and do prep and clean. I worked near the entrance. Large glass doors, but visually blocked off from my vantage point. Around 3 a.m., I hear knocking on the doors. This isn't completely uncalled for. Usually it's someone coming in for an early shift but didn't have a key card. Sometimes it's someone's food delivery, or sometimes a customer who thinks we are open despite clearly being closed. I approach the door. It's a man that I don't recognize, wet from the rain. He looks normal enough, but something about him unnerved me. He had that vibe to him. You know, the one where it seems like maybe they're on their way to becoming a full-blown addict, but for now they still manage to give the appearance of functionality. He was holding his stuff together just enough to appear normal, but the edges were definitely shaky. Anyway, without unlocking the door, I announced that the store was closed. He told me that he just needed my help. His car had broken down in the parking lot and he needed a boost. I didn't drive, so I told him I couldn't help him. I should have walked away there, but he was out in the rain. And I did legitimately feel bad, so I told him I would see if any of our few crew did drive. I did find someone who was willing to help and got the night crew manager involved as well. We went out. It turned out he was parked a bit off from the entrance in a fairly secluded spot, and he had a lady with him. There was a similar vibe with her, almost but not exactly normal. It didn't click right away, but I figured they had been hooking up in the car in the parking lot. Maybe left the radio or lights on and drained the battery. To me, that explained the weird, unnerving feeling. They either felt ashamed or guilty, and it was showing through. Anyway, my coworker goes over to help give them a boost. The manager and I stay out there with him nearby watching. The two lovebirds kept peeking over at us a bit uncomfortably. After a few moments, the coworker returns from the car and hurries us back inside. We don't see them drive off, which seems odd. We get inside lockup again, and then the coworker thanks us for staying out there with him and not leaving him alone with them. He also caught on to the unnerving air about them, and it made him worried. What worried him more was when it also turned out that there was nothing wrong with their car. Story 14. I used to work the night shift at a middle school. Every night while cleaning out the boys' locker room, I would hear at least one locker slam shut, sometimes more. This creeped me out when I started, but after a couple of months, I got used to it. One night while cleaning one of the girls' locker rooms, I heard a girl scream. I walked out of the locker room and even looked outside. The building didn't see anybody. Before that, I worked at the high school. I'd randomly hear doors open and close. Nowadays, I work the day shift at another school. About a year ago, I just got to the building to begin my shift. It was still dark out, and I was turning on all the lights. When I walked by the main office, I heard what sounded like someone ransacking the place. Papers were being tossed, and I heard what sounded like a table or file cabinet being dragged. I remember my first thought was, man, somebody must have lost something important. Then I clicked. It was 6 in the morning, and it was either Thanksgiving or Christmas break, meaning there was no school, and there shouldn't be anybody in there. It took me a second to work up the courage to go in and check it out. When I did, nobody was there, and nothing was out of place. Finally, last month, I got a call from dispatch at 3 a.m. The fire alarm was going off, and they needed somebody to go turn it off. As soon as I walked in, I freaked out. The alarm was blaring, but what scared me was the strobe light that flashed with the alarm. The building was pitch black, except every other second when that strobe lit the halls up. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie, where they're looking for the intruder. I was half expecting to see someone pop up out of nowhere when the halls lit up. Story 15. Not mine, but I used to work at a small hotel, and the manager there told me a terrifying night shift story. It was about midnight when she got a call at the front desk from a man. He said that he's with his 8-year-old daughter, who dances competitively and needed advice on what she should wear. She gave him some basic fashion advice. He asked my manager, what about fishnet leggings? Do you think those are too scandalous? He then proceeded to talk in graphic detail about how he thought his own daughter had been trying to seduce him for weeks, and how he was starting to enjoy seeing her dance in these cute outfits. Meanwhile, my manager was looking through a computer system, trying to figure out who this man was so she could call the cops. However, the room he was reportedly in was empty. The man ends up hanging the phone up before she could find out where he was truly calling from. A couple of months later, at around 11 p.m., my manager answered the desk phone. A familiar voice asked her if she could help him pick out an outfit for his daughter's next dance recital. She asked him, "Let me guess you want to know if she should wear fishnet leggings." The man immediately hangs up the phone. Story 16. I worked the night shift at a group home for disabled adults. It was a pretty chill job. Generally, I showed up for work at 9 p.m., finished up some household chores, did the dishes, swept and mopped the floors, took out the trash, folded some laundry, stuff like that, and then watched TV with one of the clients until he was ready for bed. After I helped the aforementioned client into bed, I slept on the couch until about 7 a.m., when it was time to get them up, give them their meds, and make them breakfast. Then I was done at 9 a.m. and had the day to myself. It would have been the perfect job if one of the clients didn't hate me. I guess I looked like a relative that abused him or something, but he was an alcoholic and usually passed out intoxicated by the time I got there, and wasn't a morning person for the same reason. So I didn't really have to deal with him much. Then one night was a perfect storm of events. The alcoholic client was still up when I arrived for my shift, which was a bit of a bummer, since he swore at me and called me names. But I helped him make a snack, and he went to bed after eating. The next thing I know, there are EMTs knocking on the door. The client had called them because he was in pain. The EMTs assessed him and stated that they didn't see a reason to bring him to the hospital since the pain was caused by a chronic condition, but he demanded to be taken anyway. So they loaded him up into the ambulance and went. I couldn't go with him because I was working alone and had two other, much less independent clients to look after. The managers that were normally on call were away at a conference, so I called my immediate supervisor, who was acting on call, to inform her of what happened. My supervisor's husband was at work, and she was home alone with her young children, so she couldn't go to the hospital. She didn't want to call someone in either, so the plan was that the client would have to stay at the hospital overnight, and she would pick him up in the morning. It wasn't an emergency, so the nurses at our small-town hospital probably wouldn't call in the doctor, and the client likely wouldn't be seen until the doctor came in to do rounds at about 4 or 5 a.m., so it should have been fine. About an hour later, I got a call from the ER nurses with an ultimatum. Come pick up the client right now, or they're calling the cops because he is causing a disturbance. Awesome. I got the client on the phone and explained that I was trying to find him a way home, but he had to calm down in the meantime. I told the nurses I would call them back as soon as I figured something out. I called every taxi in the phone book, but of course none of them were running since it was a weeknight and the bars had already closed for the night. I was weighing getting into my car and picking him up myself since the other clients were in bed, and I would only be gone for like 20 minutes tops when I had an epiphany. Some kid was trying to start his own Uber knockoff in my town. I got the kid on the phone, and he agreed to pick up the client from the hospital. He demanded an absurd amount of money for the service, but whatever. I was desperate. I called the nurses at the hospital and explained the updated plan, but the client had calmed down since their last call, and they were waiting on some tests to come back. Frustrating, awesome girls, thanks for letting me know. Great, frustrating teamwork. The nurses assured me they'd be quick, and the kid agreed to wait at the hospital until the client was done. So the crisis was averted, I guess. Then I had to figure out how to pay the kid for picking up the client. The client had no money, and of frustrating course, the petty emergency cash box was empty. All I had on me was my debit card, and there was no way this kid had a debit machine on him. So I did the best thing I could think of. I borrowed the money from another client, and when my replacement came in the next morning, I went straight to the bank, withdrew the same amount of money I had borrowed, and paid back the other client immediately. Was it against the rules? Yep. But what other choice did I have besides letting a client get dragged off to the drunk tank on my watch shift from hell over right? Nope. A month later, I got called into a manager's office and written up for borrowing money from the other client. Honestly, I was probably fine with the write-up since I did break the rules. But what really ticked me off was the insinuation that I stole from the client I borrowed the money from, and that the company was doing me a big favor by not firing me. The company, the managers, my supervisor, no one would accept any responsibility for the situation they put me in. They just said I handled the situation wrong, and when I asked how I should have handled it, they said not like that. So I gave my notice. Story 17. I used to work nights at a Home Depot. There was one time when for a week or so, our store stayed open 24 hours. For the most part, this wasn't really a problem. Typically, nobody comes shopping for home improvement items at 2 in the morning, except that one couple that came looking for marble countertops at 1:30 in the morning, and the woman was wearing a nice dress. I guess there was also that one young lady who came looking for a toilet paper roll holder a little after midnight. I had just gotten off my first break, and she was wearing jorts and one of those white with black belt stereotypical karate outfits. She was oddly specific about which roll holder to get to. But the real story lies within the insulation. It was nearing 3 in the morning, and another guy and I were stocking insulation, as well as fixing the bays and some such maintenance. A bunch of big R30s had fallen in their bay, and while I was sorting through them, a hand came out of the mess and grabbed my arm. I lost my mind enough for not only the guy I was working with to freak out, but also for my boss, who was across the store, to come check out the commotion. It turns out a homeless drunkard had come into the store at some point, and I can only assume before the night crew showed up, and had made a nest in the insulation where he fell asleep. The dude was in bad shape too, like far gone into whatever inebriation that we had to call the police to remove him. I was always a little more cautious around the insulation after it, for at least the time the store stayed open 24 hours. Story 18. I worked overnight security at a convention center for a few years. One night at 2 a.m., I was on cameras chit-chatting with another officer who was stationed at what we called base, I had two other guys and my supervisor out on patrol. I saw a homeless dude go up our outdoor elevator to a public terrace and was keeping an eye on him. No big deal. He goes to a corner just out of reach of our cameras, a corner known to us for people to usually catch a quick nap in. I called on the radio to our nearest patrol officer, who was also patrolling with my supervisor, that this guy was hanging out here doing whatever. They casually started walking towards the area. Upon their arrival at the scene, the next thing I know, on another camera directly below this terrace corner, like 50 feet below, also right outside our office, I see a body drop straight down and land on their legs, collapsing to the ground. I quickly stood up from my chair and was panicking. Holy crap, holy crap, holy crap. I grabbed the first aid kit and ran out of the office to go outside. My other officer on base jumped on the phone and called 911. My supervisor said, "Base, call 911, we're already on it." I was the first one there, and this homeless man was writhing in pain, shattered bones protruding from his ankles, bleeding from the mouth, trying to mumble what happened. He managed to roll over, and I saw his hands were also messed up with more bones protruding from his wrists. I didn't dare touch him, and I doubted my first aid kit would have helped at all. My supervisor and other officers came running down the stairs to the scene. Apparently, when they arrived at the original scene on the terrace, in my camera's blind spot, the guy was sitting on the ledge with a 50-foot drop directly below him. My supervisor yelled, "Hey, get down from there." And the homeless dude just lifted himself up and dropped, not a word spoken. First responders arrived and took him to the hospital. I, of course, had to write the report and review the video of the incident. A cop came an hour later and shared his condition, that he survived but would most likely never walk again. No major internal organ damage. Now for the major coincidence. A few days later, I got a new roommate who brought his girlfriend over. We were all hanging out, talking and drinking. I shared that I work security at so-and-so, and the new roommate's girlfriend said, "Didn't you guys just have a homeless man fall off your terrace and almost die?" WTF. How'd she know that? There was no media coverage. She wasn't there. Apparently, she was the godmother of his children, best friends with the mother. She shared that he was a homeless alcoholic junkie that constantly fought with the police and was in and out of jail multiple times. She got the call that he attempted suicide and rushed with the mother to the hospital to see him. She shared his conditions with me and that he was in critical condition but expected to survive. Her and my roommate shortly broke up, and I never saw her again. Story 19. I worked at a mall when I was 19, 20, and would often work late even after the store closed, on displays and whatnot. Sometimes I wouldn't get out until midnight. I always tried to park near co-workers so that we could all walk out together, but I had arrived that day at a time it was really busy, and the only parking was way out in the back. There had been a guy in the store earlier that evening that was kind of creepy, just hanging around watching me and the other cashiers, and didn't buy anything. So that night, as I was walking towards my car, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and realized it was him. He seemed like he was walking towards me, but I tried to reason that perhaps he was parked in the same area. I knew that I should probably pull out my phone and call someone stay on until I was safe in my car, but I sort of froze up. And before I could reach for my phone, he was behind me and grabbed me by the elbow, spinning me around to face him. They always talk about fight or flight response, but leave out freeze, which is what happened to me. I just felt like a deer in headlights. It all happened so fast but felt slow at the same time. It's true what they say about how it feels like time slows down. He didn't say anything at first, but he was close enough that I could smell his clothes reeked of stale cigarette smoke, and his eyes were bloodshot, and he was kind of dead-eyed. I honestly almost pissed myself. All these thoughts came to mind. I'm going to be raped, kidnapped, murdered. And then all of a sudden, I heard someone's voice. A security guard who was doing rounds outside came around the corner. It was only like 10 seconds before he came. But like I said, it also felt like it took forever. He shouts something. I still can't recall what, and the dude takes off. The security guard comes over to me asking if I'm okay, etc. I asked him if the next day it might be possible to find the creep on the store security tapes and put up some notice for security to not let him in, or something. He hadn't actually done anything to me, so it's not like I could call the police. He stayed with me until my husband came to pick me up. I was still in shock for quite a while. I already had PTSD before this, so I totally shut down and couldn't absorb what happened. But what really scared me, I hadn't noticed this. But I heard the security guard tell my husband that the guy had like a pocket knife out I just didn't see it. What was he going to do with that? After already struggling with PTSD, I had to take a break from work. It was hard to let go of the what ifs, and even now it's crazy to think I was so close probably to real harm. It's been several years and I still can't walk alone at night though. Story 20. In my 20s, I used to deep clean a Burger King between 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. while it was closed. After my shift, I'd either head north and stop at Circle K on my way to another job, or head west to an Exxon to grab a cup of coffee to help keep me up so I could regulate my schedule. I'll call the clerk working at the Circle K Alice. Alice was in her early 20s, very pleasant, and knew I was a regular at 4 a.m. She'd put down whatever she was doing and take a smoke break with me. Our conversations were mostly about movies and TV, occasionally crazy night shift stories, but rarely personal. It was a nice break after being alone all night. Now on days that I didn't go to my other job, I'd head to Exxon on my way home, where the clerk, whom I'll call Bob, would also stop what he was doing and join me for an early morning smoke. Bob was in his mid-20s and we would talk mostly about sports and music. Now and then, his buddies would be there as well. It passed the time before the sun would rise and people would be out and about. One night I finished my Burger King job early and headed to the Circle K to chit-chat with Alice before my other job. As I was coming up to her gas station, I saw the parking lot roped off in yellow tape and several police cars in the lot. My heart sank as I headed to work. Later on that morning, I heard it on the news. It was awful. Alice had been murdered. She was shot in the back of her head. The murderer emptied the register, took the surveillance tapes that were recording at that time, and left her in the back office. Police had no leads. After my shift that following night, I headed over to Exxon before going home. Bob asked me if I heard the news about the Circle K clerk. We were both in shock that something like that took place in our sleepy southern town. We discussed how we'd deal with an intruder if our stores were attacked. It makes you take a step back and realize how quickly it can all end. The Circle K was up and running a day after the murder. Things were starting to become complacent again in a short manner of time. For a couple of weeks, there were no leads. I'm sure I was recorded on earlier surveillance tapes, so I was waiting to get called, but never did. Even though I stopped going to Circle K, I'd still visit Bob at Exxon, and we'd carry on as usual. About a month later, the news reported that they had found the murderer. They had a shot of 3 guys in handcuffs against the back of the police cruiser. One by one, they showed their faces. The first one looked familiar, but couldn't recognize him. The second one appeared, and I couldn't place him either. That's when I saw the third guy. My jaw dropped. How could it be? And there he was on my TV screen. Bob. All this time had passed, and I was alone with this guy, discussing this murder for weeks, and the MFR did it. Man, I was duped. Bob confessed to the police. It turns out that Bob and Alice had been dating when she called it off because he didn't give her space. On his days off, he'd sit in the Circle K parking lot watching her, and if he was working, one of his buddies did it for him. As I suspected, I wasn't the only one she'd have a smoke break with. There were other customers who enjoyed chatting with her. Bob lost it one night after one of these smoke breaks and killed her. His buddies were the lookouts. He got caught by showing off the recordings of the surveillance camera and telling people that he made a movie and how realistic the murder looked. In the end, they all had their day in court. The details were revealed, and each of them went to prison. Bob was placed on death row and was eventually executed. Story 21. I was the boss, and some guy wasn't paying attention and had his arm on the bar behind him on the forklift he was backing up. He backed up right into a container and all but severed his arm. Just a small flap of skin was holding it on. He ran into the building, spurting blood all over, and I ran over and stopped him, sat him down, and got one of the guys to get me some stuff for an improvised tourniquet. I held his severed arm under mine, and I squeezed the upper arm to slow the flow until I could get the tourniquet on and tight. All the while, I was getting covered in his blood from head to toe. I finally got it stopped and sat there trying to keep him calm while the paramedics were on the way. After they took over, I asked the firemen that accompanied them if they could blast me off with the fire hose. They blasted all the blood off, but my clothes were ruined. I sat outside until I dried, and then went home and showered well, and threw the stained clothes away. I got dressed and went back to work to help the crew clean up the blood and toss the chair he was in the trash. I could taste his blood the rest of the day. It even got up my nose. I didn't notice until I went home again, but my mustache and goatee were stained from the blood too. I had to shave clean. They were able to reattach his arm, but it never worked right again. He went on permanent disability afterward. Story 22. My one day working at FedEx. The interview and training process was unremarkable, mostly focused on the evils of unions. Normal propagandist crap. During the training, we had to watch a video on safety regulations we were expected to behave by. After 2 hours of videos, they took me out on the floor for my first day unloading the trucks. One of those safety regulations is that every truck was supposed to have 3 people to it. 2 people would unload while the third was tasked with checking and marking packages for sorting. 10 minutes in, and my second unloader disappears. A supervisor comes and takes the sorter away, telling me that they'll sort my truck farther down the belt. I'm left to unload the entirety of an 18-wheeler myself. I get an hour in with few problems by moving the lightest packages and praying that someone is going to come help me soon. 2 hours in, I'm deadlifting 75 100-pound packages out of this truck by myself. Last hour of the shift, my supervisor reappears because the truck wasn't being unloaded. I was pinned under 200 pounds of furniture. 2 other unloaders were called to free me, and I was reprimanded for not having a second lifter with me. 2 weeks of rest, a short investigation, and a workman's comp filing later. The supervisor was forced to acknowledge they were responsible for removing the 2 other workers from my truck. I was asked when they could expect me back to work, and I told them to shove it. I still have back issues years later, and there's a spot about the diameter of a soda can where my back still feels like pins and needles. Story 23. Back in the 70s, I used to work on an oil drilling rig. Rigs run around the clock in 3 8-hour shifts. Myself along with my crew arrived at the rig to find that the rig wasn't drilling. The rig was in standby mode. Drill pipe was rotating, and the drill bit was just suspended off the bottom of the hole. And the crew that we were going to relieve were not there. The only person there was the rig's tool pusher, which is a fancy title for the boss. The boss came into the driller's shack and told us what had happened during the previous shift. It's winter time and everyone has to dress warm. You work on a drilling rig, you're going to fight the elements. But what had happened was one of the workers crawled down inside the drawworks, which is basically the power lift equipment that controls the power drum the cable winds up on that lifts the drill pipe in and out of the hole. Down in the drawworks where the crew member entered, there is a high-speed jack shaft that couples the diesel engines to the transmission to the drawworks. This jack shaft has a coupler in it that allows the shaft to be taken apart if need be. The jack shaft spins around 1/500 revolutions per minute at idle speed. The worker that was down in this tight area had backed into this jack shaft while he was greasing other components in that area. The coupler he backed into had a grease zerk that caught his clothing coat and just started winding him up on the shaft. It spun him up and pulled him through a 2x 2-foot hole and pushed him against the equipment. He hit hard enough that it broke the fuel filters and lines off of one of the motors. An ambulance had come and got him and took him to the hospital. He was lucky. The top of the grease zerk, after catching his clothes, had left a red scrap just up his spine, just barely scratching his skin. He was banged up really badly from being dragged through that hole he didn't really fit through and from being slammed against the engine. He came away with a broken collarbone, cuts and bruises, and 5 broken ribs. A very fortunate person to have survived. Story 24. I'm going to keep names and places out of this because I still have an active NDA. Anyways, at the beginning of every summer, we would have a big influx of new hires as students were getting out of school and people were generally just looking for work. Anyways, one of our new hires was the burly guy that looked like he was in his 30s, 40s. Dude had a sleeve of tattoos and wore a Confederate flag bandana. Anyways, he comes in on his first day and almost immediately gets on our supervisor for not doing anything. I don't know if this dude was aware that he was chirping at a supervisor. The supervisor ignores this for like 10 minutes before finally saying, "This is your first day. Do you really want to get a bad rep with your supervisor?" This dude keeps spouting off at the sup, all while the sup is telling him to just go home and he can try to come back tomorrow with a better attitude. Eventually, the dude gets all up in the sup's face and pushes him. Sup has had enough at this point and goes in to slug the dude. The dude whips a gun out of the back of his pants and blasts the sup right in the stomach. Everyone flips out and starts running at this point. I immediately left through a window, so I don't know what happened next. But from what I heard, the dude with the gun just kind of stood there in shock like he didn't know what just happened. Cops came and surrounded the building and dragged the dude out. The supervisor survived but had to relearn how to walk. Story 25. I worked in a nursing home kitchen for a month back in 2017. Thankfully, it was a temporary job as I was on summer break from university. There were so many things that were up with that place, and I kept on questioning my boss, the head cook, and the care home manager about many things. Firstly, raw meat was stored on the top shelf in the fridge. So unhygienic. Not to mention that some of the kitchen staff had very poor personal hygiene too. I once saw one of my colleagues drop a boiled egg on the floor. To my horror, he put it straight back on the plate and gave it to a resident. That's before we even get to some of the carers. I knocked on residents' doors when I entered a resident's room. One of the senior carers pulled me up about that, but I told him to do one. Thankfully, the head cook had my back about that. Once I noticed that one of the stair banisters was loose in the dementia unit, which many residents used, and mentioned it to the maintenance guys. When they didn't do anything, I went straight to the care home manager to demand that it got done. She managed to turn the subject around from a health and safety issue to me losing my job if I didn't shut up and toe the line. I was just speechless. Oh, and the activities coordinator was one of the most horrible people I'd ever met. She was in charge when the manager wasn't around, but she was even worse than the manager. She acted so nice to the residents and their families, but she treated all the carers and the kitchen staff like dog crap and used to go on frequent power trips. I remember on one evening shift, one of the nurses was unhappy because she thought I had served dessert portions too small. No issue, I offered to fix it. The nurse wasn't having that and got the activities coordinator, and 5 minutes later she gave me an absolute dressing down in front of all my colleagues. I must admit I nearly walked out, but I didn't want to screw the guys in the kitchen over either, as they were already short-staffed as it was. It was at that point that I decided I'm never coming back to this place once this shift is over. The head cook texted me that evening after I'd finished work and basically told me that whilst he liked me, I was not welcome back at all. Apparently, I'd pissed off the higher-ups for talking back and being disrespectful. I had a feeling it was coming anyway, though, and went back to university to complete my degree. Every time I have a bad day at my current job, I always think, at least I'm not at the nursing home. Thankfully, one of the kitchen staff, whom I had always gotten on with, quit his job not long after that and reported the nursing home to the council as an anonymous whistleblower. The council sent an inspector to the home, and they noticed everything that was wrong. Apparently, the care home manager got a massive fine, yet somehow still kept her job. To my amusement, though, she complains in the town's Facebook group about being short-staffed. Story 26. My Tinder nightmare began on January 8, 2014, when I started texting with a beautiful woman who I knew was out of my league. I'm a 50-ish Caucasian guy, out of shape, overweight, but otherwise stable and normal. She was a 30-year-old black woman, college-educated, stunningly beautiful, and very elegant and slender. Nonetheless, after a few days of texting, I invited her to join me for dinner at a very nice restaurant downtown. To my dismay, she actually accepted my invitation. I was waiting for her at the bar, and when she walked in, my jaw hit the floor. She was so beautiful. I literally lost my breath for a moment. She was taller than me in her heels and was wearing a beautiful short dress with the most amazing legs I had ever seen. She greeted me with a bright smile and a gentle hug, and we were escorted to our table. We had a very good date, the conversation flowed, and she seemed to have a good time as well. We decided to continue the date and went to a couple of bars for drinks. Finally, she said it was time to go home, and since she had taken Uber earlier, I offered to give her a ride home, and she quickly agreed. All this time, I thought that even though the date was fun and comfortable, I assumed it would possibly lead to a friendship at best, considering the obvious differences. Well, when we got to her place, we talked for a few minutes more. I offered to walk her to her door, but she declined. She then got out and walked around to my door. She leaned through the window and planted a very brief but sensual kiss on my lips. My heart stopped. She then leaned back and smiled. I was able to stammer out an invitation to go out again, and she accepted without hesitation. I was on cloud nine. I knew that this remarkable woman would have a profound effect on my life. It seemed predestined. Fast forward a couple of weeks. She and I had been seeing each other nearly every day, and I was developing strong feelings already. But something was wrong. I had a weird nagging sense that she was hiding something. Although she was being very affectionate, something just felt off. Then finally it happened. We were out at a bar together. It was a good time, but she seemed distracted. As we were leaving, she turned to me and said in a serious tone, "We need to talk." I thought, this is it. The differences between us are too much for her, and I'm about to be friend-zoned. But nothing prepared me for what came next. She asked me to just listen and not say anything, and I agreed. She then started out by saying that she had developed strong feelings for me, but there was something that I needed to know about her that might make me want to change my mind about pursuing a relationship. My mind was spinning, and so many scenarios raced through my head. Is she married? Is she a criminal? Then I remembered a few days earlier when we were making out, and I touched her breast lightly and realized that she had breast implants, because it was quite hard. So I thought, OMG, is she a transsexual? But as it turns out, she wasn't. But that would have been better than what came next. She looked at me, and with a tear in her eye, she told me that she has stage 4 breast cancer. She was originally diagnosed 4 years earlier as stage 3 and had beaten it back into remission after having a double mastectomy along with radiation treatment and chemotherapy. Now it had returned as stage 4, and she was to start chemo again in 2 weeks. I was floored. She then stated that she would understand if I wanted to turn and run, and she wouldn't think less of me for it. My response was to reiterate that I adored her, and I thought she was an amazing woman, and if she wanted me to take this journey with her, I would be honored to do so. We kissed and just held each other for a while. Finally, she said goodnight and went to her car to go home. I cried all the way home. We had a full, amazing year together. Had to go to Japan for work, and she met me there in between chemo treatments. She never cried and was always elegant. I learned what the true definition of grace meant. We lived a lifetime in 2014. She passed away 9 months ago, 15 months after we met. I am a much better man for having met her and shared in her struggle. I love you and miss you so much, Jenny. Story 27. It's Tuesday. I matched up with this girl. I'll call her Elle, and we chatted back and forth for a bit. She's cute as hell, and I suggest meeting up, and I try to find a nice neutral spot near her where we can get together. She invites me to a barbecue with some of her former co-workers. I'm pretty hesitant about this at first, as I don't want to meet someone for the first time at some BBQ. Well, I caved, and I ended up meeting her at this BBQ, and in all honesty, it was pretty fun. Elle and I are getting along pretty well. She's trying to feed me shots of rum. I don't have any because I have to work in the morning, and all is pretty damn great. Anyways, the BBQ comes to an end, and she abruptly says, "Okay, I'll talk to you later," and leaves. Confused, I drive my ass home, and as soon as I get off the freeway, she shoots me a text saying, "You could have come over to my house if you asked." I tell her I still can. She shoots me her address, and I turn my ass around and speed to her house. She doesn't live in the greatest part of town, but I was too certain that I was going to get some, so I didn't really care. I pull up to her house, and she meets me out front and greets me as I walk up. As I'm walking up the stairs to her door, she mentions that she takes in stray cats. I'm allergic to cats, but really, as long as I don't touch my eyes, it's a non-issue. Also, I'm thinking she probably has maybe 4 cats at most. These thoughts are running through my mind as I'm still walking up the steps when she says, "Yeah, so I have like 15 cats," and then opens the front door. The front living room was pitch black, but I saw at least a dozen pairs of eyes all turn and look at the now open front door. Then they all scattered like a bunch of cockroaches. Now I haven't broken stride this entire time and continue right through the door. As I crossed the threshold, I thought I had walked through a goddamn wall, as the smell that washed over me was horrific, and it felt like it had weight. Cat piss. Undeniably, it was pure cat piss from 15 unwashed, stray motherfucking cats. There isn't a light on in this house, but I can still see stacks of bins all over the room like it was something out of one of those hoarder TV shows. On the tops of these rubbish towers sat some of the cats peering down at me. Elle quickly ushers me to her room, which happens to smell like bleach as my nostrils have started to burn from a smell other than cat piss. She mentions having just cleaned her room and having scrubbed everything down with bleach, as if that's a normal thing to do when you clean a room. Any sane guy probably would have backed out well before now, and I should have too, but I had come too far and my cock was way too hard to turn back now. We get comfy on her bed, and she puts on Netflix. This is before I knew Netflix and chill was a thing, but I knew where things were going. She picks a Saw-esque type movie called Adrenaline, I think, and makes herself comfortable as the little spoon. I make some advances during this frustrating horror movie, and she's completely unresponsive. So after about 45 minutes of nothing, I tell her I need to get home and go to bed since it's 2 a.m. and I have work in the morning. During my entire time at her house, I tried really damn hard not to touch my face, but I knew since walking in there was no way I was getting out unscathed. I drive home and my eyes are itchy as hell and are starting to water. After getting home, I look in the mirror and my eyes just look like total crap, completely bloodshot and itchy. The allergy has never lasted more than a couple of hours after starting, so I went to bed and figured I would be fine by the morning. Boy, was I wrong. I wake up with my alarm at 4:45 a.m., bleary-eyed and feeling like total crap as I expected. My eyes are heavy and I can barely open them as I shamble to the bathroom to take a shower. I flip on the light and see, or rather barely see, a frustrating horror show. My right eyelid had swollen out to the point where it was nearly in line with my brow and was completely swollen shut. My left was not much better. Even worse, it felt like sand had been poured in both of them. I had to call in sick to work and go to the doctor to get a prescription to bring the swelling down when it looked like it wasn't going down after a couple of hours. I text Elle mentioning that apparently I was more allergic to cats than I remembered, and I never got a response. Story 28. I met a guy on Tinder. Seemed nice, fairly attractive. Seemed a little vanilla, actually. He didn't drink or smoke, wanted to be a meteorologist, was super close with his grandfather. Gentlemanly and family-oriented. Went to Starbucks and talked for a couple of hours. It was nice. So I set up another date. We went for ice cream and again talked for a while. We were sitting outside and I mentioned something about how guys have obvious body parts to be attracted to on women, while girls pick out odd things like calves and such. He gets real weird and says, I don't know if I should tell you this. So of course I prod him until he tells me. So first he says he's got a foot fetish. It's not super strange and I'm mostly curious, so I ask him tons of questions about it. He'd never been in a serious relationship. So I asked him if he could handle being with a girl who wasn't into it at least long enough to feel love towards him, and he said no. I've called a girl from back pages a couple of times because I couldn't take it anymore. Still not that weird. Then he asks if I have ever heard of a crush fetish. He tells me not to Google it because it'll freak me out. Still haven't, never will. There are 2 levels of a crush fetish. LVL1, becoming aroused watching someone crush invertebrate animals under their feet like bugs, which was his fetish. And LVL2, watching someone crush vertebrate animals like bunnies or kittens. This got me thinking about our previous date. We had a conversation on the first date about how I had been getting a lot more bugs in my room that summer, and so I'd been like squishing bugs all fucking day. And he said that really got him going. I also realized he had asked me what kind of shoes I typically wear, and I had just brushed it off and answered him. I was wearing moccasins and, being a pretty open person, told him how they make my feet smelly. So I try to avoid them. He told me that, I got really turned on when you said that. I'd love to smell your shoes if you'd let me. Among other very forward, very specific and unwelcome statements about what turned him on about me. Best part, I told him a week or so later I'd met someone and that we should end our communications. He texted me a few months later 4 or 5 times asking me for my help and that he'd pay me to let him do stuff with my feet. Story 29. My first and only Tinder date. I started talking to a cute guy. We hit it off really well. We'll call him Greg. Greg lived in a town nearly an hour away, so we texted for about 2 weeks before we decided to meet due to schedules. During this time, Greg consistently attempted to wow me with his food knowledge. I work in the fine dining restaurant industry, often telling me about what meal he was cooking for him and his roommates each night. After several days of talking, he then asked me to come to his house so he would be able to cook for me. I obliged, figuring what's the worst that could happen. I've talked to him several times and felt okay about the whole situation. The day comes and we meet somewhere neutral, and I follow him to his house, all the while him explaining how excited he is to cook for me. We arrive at his place. Everything is going really great. He's exactly as I pictured him, and his personality fits me perfectly. Dinner time rolls around and he tells me he needs to go downstairs to begin prep. I become eager and say I'd love to help. He insists I stay on the couch and relax. We continue to talk across rooms and I can't see what's going on in the kitchen. He puts something in the oven and says it will be ready in just a bit and that he made extra in case I was hungry. 15 minutes later, Greg leaps off the couch to a timer and runs to the kitchen. He brings sauces first, saying they are the best part. He lays ketchup, ranch, and BBQ sauce on the table. I begin to get confused, wondering what he made, as he refused to tell me, announcing that he wanted to keep it a secret. Greg returns to the kitchen to retrieve the plates. He walks in and carries a turkey platter to the table. I gaze into what had to be no less than 3 bags of frozen fries he had displayed on a turkey platter for our dinner. He looks at me eagerly, awaiting my reaction for me to lose it. I begin uncontrollably laughing, and his smile drops as I say, "This is great, thank you," assuming this was a gag meal, and he had prepared dinner to follow. No, Greg invited me to dinner to cook me his specialty frozen French fries. Story 30. I once had a lady and her teenage son come in to trade in several DVDs and games they had just stolen from the Walmart behind the strip mall where our store was. A Walmart employee calls me to ask if they are in my store and says the cops are on the way, so stall or do what you can to keep them there. I said sure. I told them the cash versus store credit value of their items without mentioning that I can't even take them because they are still wrapped in the cellophane. I walk them around the store and talk about which games are the best value for the money, etc. The cops show up and ask them to step outside, and I just smile and go back behind the counter. They followed the police out, and one officer came back a minute later to get the merchandise. That's the last I heard about it. Not a horror story, but definitely weird. Then there was this wealthy couple who had 3 kids, and each kid had a Wii, a PS3, and an Xbox 360. They would pre-order every major game that came out for each system, always the deluxe edition. They spent a ton of money in our store, and they were crazy. So abusive to every employee, they cussed at us and called us stupid. They would ask for things they knew they couldn't have and then throw a fit. They would scour their receipts for anything that could be a mistake and make you explain it to them over and over. I went to work at a different company, and they came into my store there and got in line for my favorite cashier. I immediately called a manager over when it was their turn to check out, explained how I knew them, and that there was a 99% chance they would make the cashier cry. He went over, and just as he got there, they were beginning to raise their voices about some supposed mistake. Luckily, that manager is super good at handling people and got them out without letting them get a word in edgewise. I practically had PTSD from dealing with them. I think they got off on abusing people together. They would sometimes be laughing as they did it. If they found a legitimate mistake in anything, their faces would just light up. Story 31. I was in ASM for about a year and had done retail before. Our store was right in between a fairly upscale touristy part of town as well as some of the poorer neighborhoods, so we got all sorts of people. I'll tell one horror story and then one uplifting story. The holiday season was in full swing and we were always crowded. This particular day, we had a few seasonal hires in to help with the workload, and I was behind the counter pulling games as people came up to make the transactions faster. Then suddenly a smell hit the entire building like 100 cats had peed in the air conditioner, and someone had tried to get it dry by stoking a fire with burning hair. My seasonals looked at me with a mix of confusion and terror as a family of 4 approached the counter, and it slowly became apparent that they were the cause of the smell. I've been nose blind before from staying with an aunt who used to be an animal hoarder, but this was far worse. I sent my seasonals on break, grabbed the hand sanitizer, pumped a small mountain of it into my hands, and as casually as possible, smeared it on my upper lip, hoping my facial hair would hold on to it and block the smell. It mostly worked. I was already in holiday rush mode, but this was the fastest I ever got a used Xbox 360 and GTA 5 packaged and ready to go. When they left, we noticed that the store had actually cleared out of all other customers who also couldn't deal with the odor. My SM came out of the back, gave me props for not embarrassing them, and promptly proceeded to fill our store with Feebreeze. Story 32. A few of my friends started a local gaming club in our hometown because the nearest store had started preventing people from playing there, giving the reason of the new rules. If memory serves me correctly, the latest edition of Warhammer 40K from GW had introduced a new rule that said an army had to be a certain size painted and consisted of models that were from the latest edition. At least that's what the shop staff said in a condescending and patronizing tone. So kids showing up to play had to have spent hundreds of pounds on models and paints and had them painted to an acceptable level which was up to the staff to decide and knew. I stopped playing completely around then. Gone were the days when you could make kit bash land raiders, etc., or use improvised models, which was the whole point of the original Rogue Trader edition. I remember a GW store employee nonchalantly telling my friend who organized the local club that having a local Warhammer club was against the rules and not legal. He pissed himself, laughing at the thought of the local police storming the flat above his shop to seize toy soldiers as a GW official stood by to inspect their authenticity. Story 33. We had our regular customers, and over time, we would get to recognize a few people and have a general sense of what their interests were beyond just being salespeople and trying to pitch whatever was hot and new. Frequently, we would also get people who knew they had 7 days or however long to trade a game back in for the full amount they paid for, and would use us as a general rental service that way. We were supposed to flag their account somehow to stop this from happening, but it wasn't common enough at our location to really care. We weren't losing money, and it was better than them stealing from us. One sort of grungy guy missing a couple of teeth would come in regularly, and he had a few different criteria. He owned a regular DS, he didn't have much money, and he wanted the games to be very long so they could occupy his time. Usually RPGs, but they had to have a good story. He'd bring it back if it wasn't engaging and ask for something else. The first couple of times he did this, I thought maybe he was trying to put one over on us, but the games he was picking actually were too long to reasonably finish in the time he would have them. I guess I could have checked the save files, but it wasn't that big of a deal. He disappears for a couple of weeks, and then one day I'm working and I get a call. It's him. It's not too busy, so we chat for a few minutes. He basically wants to pick my brain about what we've got that's less than $10 that will last for a month, and if it's worth his time to come get it, because his money is so tight that just driving to our store and not finding something will be sort of a significant loss. This happens to be during a week where Dragon Quest IX is on sale for less than $10, and we have one copy left, so I set it aside and tell him to try it out. My wife isn't a big JRPG fan, but she tried it, and it held her interest for quite a while. So maybe this guy will like it too. He comes by, gets it, thanks me, and leaves. I don't see him for months. He's one of those regulars who you get to thinking about whether or not you would really say you were acquainted, but just that general, I hope they're okay sort of thing. Then one day he comes back in wearing a full suit, grinning ear to ear. I recognize him right away and ask how things are going. He tells me they turned around and he got a job as a cook at a Sonic within walking distance from his house and had been able to save his money for a while thanks to Dragon Quest being so long. And he wanted to say thanks and to buy his mom a PS3. He knew the only games she really recognized were classics, so he picked out one of the new Pac-Man games in Namco Museum. He was looking at the price tags of a couple of other ones, and I could tell he was doing some quick mental math. So I told him, pick the ones you're looking at and we'll see what we can make work. He gets one more game for his mom and brings them up to the front. It's been a few years since, so I honestly don't remember what, if any, promotions we had going on at the time, but wouldn't you know it? He got enough of a discount for some mysterious reason that he was able to afford everything. Story 34. I was waiting in line at a GameStop once to buy GTA 5 when a really angry and somewhat fat female about mid-30s walked in and cut in front of everyone in line and loudly demanded money back for a used game she had bought. I don't know if GameStop does not have a return policy on used games or if she had bought it a long time ago, but the poor guy at the register couldn't give her her money back. She got increasingly more aggressive and even louder, loud enough for the manager to hear and come out. He just repeated what the cashier had said, and she lost her shit completely. She threw the game case at the manager, hit him right in the face with it. Then she spat on the cashier in the face before starting to tear the place apart, like she tried to do as much damage as possible. The cashier immediately called 911, and me and another guy that had been standing in line asked the manager if he needed help throwing her out of the store. What he actually wanted, though, was for us to keep her in the store so that she couldn't run off and get away before police showed up. But we weren't comfortable doing that, not being sure what the legality of that locking her in the store is. Luckily for the manager, the local PD is literally just across a large Walmart parking lot, less than a minute away, so the cops showed up before she even tried to leave. She was 100% calm when they took her. It was like flipping a switch. from a raging lunatic to calm and compliant in literally 1 second. I thought they for sure were going to have to take her down hard, but nope. Anyway, the cops took our details and said they'd be in touch, but I never heard back from them. I guess between the manager and the cashier and all the other witnesses, they didn't need to take a statement from all of us. And I'm sure the store had video cameras too. I'm not going to say which GameStop it was, but the whole thing made the news. Jennifer did see a video of the incident though, which was odd. But I was kind of relieved because I wouldn't want my ugly face all over the news. Just open mouth staring at this crazy woman in utter disbelief. Story 35. I worked at GameStop while I was in high school, and then again for a few years during university. 2 different locations. In high school, I worked in a plaza that was across the parking lot from Walmart. In university, I worked in a location in a mall. I started working at the high school location when I was 16. I'm a girl. When I worked there was a guy who worked in the menswear store in the same plaza who came around all the time to talk to me about World of Warcraft. I thought he was a little weird, but ultimately harmless. I was young and naive, I guess. He asked me for my contact information a few times, but I always told him that store policy dictated that I wasn't allowed to give it out. I went for lunch one time and was sitting in the back room eating my sandwich and watching the cameras when the menswear guy came in. I watched him talk to my manager and it got pretty heated. There was no sound on the cameras, but you could tell by the way they were talking. When the guy left, I came out and asked my manager what happened, and he said that menswear guy had asked after me and said some really inappropriate stuff. When informed that I was definitely a minor menswear guy, must have been in his 30s, I'd guess. He said he didn't care, and that prompted my boss to tell him he wasn't welcome back in the store. I never did find out the details of what inappropriate stuff he said. Same location, once again, we were a pretty low volume store. So a lot of the time there was only one person working. It just so happened that I was working alone one day when some dude came in asking to return a PC game. We couldn't return PC games at all. The return policy at GS was already pretty strict, but PC games were the most strict because most of the ones we sold at the time still had activation codes in them. So once it was opened, the code was used and it was yours. This guy seemed, I don't know, intoxicated or something. First he said he didn't like it, then he said it didn't work. Then he claimed he'd never opened it, despite the obviously broken seal on the box. I told him that I couldn't return the game, and he flipped his shit, started yelling, cursing, threatening me, all kinds of things. And I was alone in the store at the time, just me and him. He literally attempted to lunge over the counter at me. It was kind of a slow-mo moment in real life, and I remember asking myself as he was coming towards me whether I'd get fired if I punched him in self-defense. Thankfully, I didn't have to, because he was a rather rotund man, and he bounced off the corner of the counter instead of going over it. Another customer came in. Some guy built like a football player saw what was happening, grabbed the dude and literally threw him out. So when I went to university, the mall location that I worked at was one of the busiest locations in the country. We had just gotten a new manager from this small, sleepy little town nearby, and he had no idea what he was in for. It was, I don't know, October or something when he started working there. We, the other employees, immediately told him that it was a little later than normal for hiring the Christmas tum, but he still had time to get them in and trained on time. But he needed to do it immediately. He decided that we didn't need Christmas temps. His reasoning was that our current store had more permanent employees than his old store had, including temps for the Christmas rush, so we would be fine. Except for the fact that we were one of the busiest locations in the country, it was miserable. He did eventually admit his mistake, but not until it was way, way too late. Story 36. Worked at a store that had a service department. They couldn't ring up anything at the service counter, but they had a computer which made it look like a register. Guy is standing there patiently waiting to be rung up. Finally, somebody notices him and asks what he needs. "I'd like to pay," he says. "I'm sorry, this isn't a register," replies the service tech. The guy then proceeds to try and convince the service tech to let him pay because the line for the main registers is 3 hours long. Of course, the service tech couldn't because he didn't have a register. He just had a computer for making appointments and such. So after 15 minutes of arguing, the guy moves off to find the line. Here's the fun part. While he was arguing, somebody else saw him standing by something that looked like a register and got in line behind him. Then people saw the shorter line and got in behind them. With nobody to control it, the line to nowhere grew quickly. 15 minutes was all it took for the knot line to snake all the way around the department. So when the doofus who started this whole fiasco went to find the right line, he found the end of the line he had started. Then the guy behind him heard that there wasn't a register, so he followed the first guy. Then the next customer followed the second, and so on. They walked around in a circle for an hour before somebody noticed them. We almost had a riot when a manager had to tell 100 people that they weren't in line and had just waited an hour for nothing. That same year, we had several scuffles at points where the register line had forked into two lines. From then on, we marked off a huge register path and had several employees just manage the line. Story 37. When I was in school, I worked at Walmart for the holidays. They had a fun agreement where if you worked Thanksgiving 6 p.m. until Black Friday morning 6 a.m., you didn't have to come in on Black Friday. Fun, right? So after Thanksgiving lunch with my boyfriend's family at 4 p.m., I headed to work where I put on an oversized yellow smock with a blue sun on it. I was put in charge of 70-inch plasma screen television vouchers. I was given 7 vouchers to distribute at 8 p.m. so customers could go to the register, pay for the television, and have it loaded into their car around back. So problems arose very quickly. A line for the 70-inch television began as I started my shift at 6 p.m. As soon as 7 people formed a line, I had to turn people away. At 8 p.m., the vouchers were distributed. Customers 1 and 2 were husband and wife. They were an older couple who brought camping chairs to wait for their 2 vouchers. Here's where the mess started. Customer 8 approaches me for a voucher. I tell him that they have all been distributed and he was free to come back within the hour to see if anyone surrendered their voucher. He then becomes visually distressed and angry, to which there was nothing I could do. In comes customer 1 from before the older man from the couple. He offers to sell his voucher to customer 8 for what was close to the price of the on-sale television that had not been purchased. Customer 8 agrees, reluctantly pulls out the money in exchange for the television voucher. The older couple then walks off with not only Mrs. Customer 2's television voucher, but also the newly acquired cash to buy said television at the register. In comes customer 9, who addresses me very angrily with, "Hey, aren't you going to do something about that?" while gesturing wildly at the older couple who totally scored and the poor guy who essentially paid double for a Black Friday television. I had to let that customer know that what others did with the vouchers was their business. This guy got way too close to me, and one of my coworkers noticed and came to help. The guy then takes off in a huff and claims Walmart cheated him. 2 months later, I quit to work in my licensed field and never looked back. Years later, still no regrets. I don't even like going into the store I worked at. Story 38. Worked at Walmart years ago. One of my managers thought she was being sneaky and swapped my Black Friday off shift with an on shift at 9 a.m. My shifts normally didn't start until 1 and ended at 9, so this was utter bullshit. I was in the bakery department and had to work all of Thanksgiving the day before, and they ended up needing more help. I came in at 6 a.m. that day and worked a 14-hour shift because most of my team had been given the holiday off, my manager's excuse being, "You're young, they have families they need to be with and kids to celebrate with." So I was pretty angry. I found out that the Black Friday sale was a 65 LCD TV and electronics and PS3s, so needless to say, it was going to be a bloodbath. I stayed in my department because there was literally no one else there and caught up on much-needed sanitation. When the manager found out before the sale started, she came my way to rain down fire, brimstone, and bullshit on me. Thankfully, I could use their own bullshit policies against them. There needs to be at least one member of the bakery crew on hand to write on cakes, and since I was the only one there, they were shit out of luck. I got out of Black Friday. Bullshit got an easy day of work and the perfect spot to watch the chaos, all while screwing over a manager I hated. It was a beautiful day. Story 39. I worked as a cashier at Target 2 years ago on Black Friday. My particular store opened at 7 on Thanksgiving, and I had to be there from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I don't know how many other stores do it, but for mine, we had vouchers for the big ticket items like the new iPads and huge HD TVs, etc. So there usually wasn't a stampede of people, and the lines to the registers were set up very efficiently. Seeing all the preparation to avoid making it a shit show, I began to feel hopeful that it would be an okay night, well worth the holiday pay, as the doors were unlocked. I could not have been more wrong. About midnight, two large women come to my register with 4 carts piled with random shit that they had coupons for. Just imagine 40 bottles of shampoo, 50 sticks of deodorant, 25 2 liters of soda, etc. All just piled in there. I take a deep breath and begin scanning items. And as I tell them the total's somewhere around $800, one of them pulls out a wad of slightly damp coupons from her bra. Stifling the urge to vomit, I accept them and proceed to attempt to scan roughly 200 coupons. After doing about 20 of them with only 3 or 4 working, I decided to look at the coupons and sort them into expired and non-expired, as well as coupons from other stores that we didn't take. We would take manufacturers' coupons and Target coupons, but we wouldn't take a Bed Bath and Beyond coupon. About 20 minutes later, some coupons were hard to make out because of the dampness, and the ladies insisting I sort through them. I finalized the tally and proceeded to scan the maybe 30 coupons that were valid acceptable. The ladies realize that the pile is significantly shorter than it should have been and start bitching at me about the lack of coupons. I explain the situation and continue scanning and then putting them away in the register. The lovely part came when the ladies realized their total was only reduced to around $700. Screaming that I was trying to scam them, the lady demanded I scan all the coupons. I politely explained that I could not scan the majority due to them being expired or unusable at our store. She then asked what discounts I could give her, and when I said that I couldn't give her any besides the normal 5% if she paid with a red card, she began pulling at the neckline of her shirt, asking if there was anything she could do to get a discount. Let me stop here and say that I am partial to the thicker female form, but I'm not particularly attracted to someone who looks like a pregnant Michelin man. So I again politely refused and said if they had any more valid coupons, I would be happy to scan them, otherwise their total was XXL. Now the fun part, the 2 land whales decide their rights have been infringed upon and begin screaming profanities, prompting the GSTL General Sales Team lead and the 2 AP officers to come to my register rather quickly. Upon seeing people who looked in charge, the ladies began telling them how I failed to do my job, etc. After telling my boss what I did, she agreed with me and said that I was following the store's policy. The ladies then tipped over all 4 carts full of their shit, spilling it all over the aisle, threw change at me and my GSTL, and proceeded to waddle out of the store. I quit right then and there, and I'm now loving my job at a bakery. Story 40. I was a former GameStop manager. The worst one I ever worked was 2006. Everyone wanted a damn Wii. When I got to the store at 4 a.m. to prep for the 5 a.m. opening, there were people wrapped around the shopping center in a line for the damn thing, even though I had a sign on the door explicitly stating that we could only guarantee them for the first 6 people. When I made the announcement to the folks in line, I thought I was about to get my ass kicked by more than a couple pissed grandmas and soccer moms who had been waiting since midnight. After opening, our systems were unbearably slow when processing credit cards, but they still worked. The rest of the day was busy, but not too terrible other than by people who couldn't find a Wii. Fast forward 3 days later, a lady walks into the store with a bank statement and starts laying into me about her card being charged $200 4 times. Processing. Not drafted yet. BTW. She insists that she won't walk out until I give her $600 cash from the register. It ended with her and me on speakerphone with my district manager, who politely told her to piss off and call her bank. Cops were very nearly called during the ensuing screaming. This is with a store packed with customers. Fun stuff. As it turned out, our credit card processor had been overwhelmed that day, and this turned out to be a wide issue. It was the explanation for the system's slowdown on Black Friday. The charges dropped off after a couple of days. Story 41. I only ever worked one Black Friday in my life. It was during my time at a craft store. There are 2 things that were constant during my year working there. The fact that every day was extremely slow because we were never too busy, and the fact that, for some reason, 90% of the customers that came in were ruder than anywhere else I've ever worked. So I'm thinking I'll have the typical rudeness, but it won't be too bad because we're always so slow. I couldn't be more wrong. For the first time ever, I couldn't spend Thanksgiving with my family because I had to work at 8 p.m., so I was already in a bad mood. That night I had things thrown at me multiple times, was screamed at much more than usual, and was trampled by a gang of old ladies as I was attempting to head back to the break room. But the worst moment came when a customer tried to buy a pack of scrapbook page protectors. The customer was attempting to buy a pack of 25 but was convinced the price was wrong because she was looking at the sticker for the pack of 10. She screamed at me for a good 5 minutes while I calmly tried to explain the price. Finally, it ended with the quote, "You're ruining my Thanksgiving, you stupid bitch." Trying not to scream back after that comment, I replied with, "I'm sorry to hear that, but unfortunately, I cannot give you the lower price as it was not mislabeled." She responded to that by throwing a punch which I ducked. My manager saw the whole thing, and the customer was escorted out and banned from our store. Story 42. I used to work security at the only shopping mall in town. It was a later shift on Friday itself as most of the crowd was gone and the stores were starting to close. I'm walking patrol near one of the seating areas, and I notice a couple sitting with a small boy, maybe 2 years old, who is crying. They tell me that they found him without his parents. The child is nonverbal, just bawling, and can't tell us anything about his family. The entire team goes into action. I and another teammate take the child to several of the nearby stores, hoping to find his parents. After about 10 minutes, I go back to the seating area and sit with the child while the rest of the team continues to search for the parents. My heart is breaking at this point from the obvious terror that the child is feeling. An employee from one of the jewelry stores nearby ends up bringing out one of the teddy bears for the kid. He calms down a bit. Finally, it's been half an hour and we can't find the kid's parents anywhere. Per policy, we call the police. Because there are actual emergency situations going on, it takes the police almost half an hour to get there. At this point, the child has been separated from his parents for more than an hour. As the officer is talking to me, my supervisor radios in that he found the parents. He comes walking up with a young couple, maybe in their early 30s, who have 5 more kids in tow. Apparently, they had been shopping in the Walmart that is attached to the mall and hadn't noticed until they got out to the car that they were missing a child. The siblings were more relieved than the parents that they were reunited with the toddler. And to top it all off, the mother asked in a very annoyed tone of voice where he had gotten the teddy bear. The officer asked the parents some questions to make sure that there was no obvious abuse going on, got their information. I'm hoping so that child welfare could follow up and let the family happily go on their way. Story 43. A few years ago, I was a cashier for a department store, and the line was down the middle of the whole store. The way it worked was the next person in line went to the next open register. Normally, people lined up at the individual registers, so every once in a while, people would start to line up at the register, and we had to point them to the line. 99% of the time, there was no issue until this Indian couple, who were regulars, and always tried to get us to use old or ineligible coupons, came in. I noticed they looked like they were trying to line up by a register and told them the line was somewhere else. They said they were just going over some stuff, so I went back to ringing my customer up. Then when I called for the next person, those 2 assholes strolled on up and cut everyone in line. I told them they weren't in line and they had to go to the back. They started yelling at me like I just kicked their cancer-ridden kid off a frustrating overpass while the whole line behind them was yelling at them to get in the back. They threw the store flyer at me and left in a huff. About 20 minutes later, they come back and start angrily talking to my manager. She comes to get me and says she thinks they just want an apology. Whatever, I can pretend to be contrite if it means they leave. Turns out they just wanted to yell at me some more and demand my manager fire me on the spot, which she wasn't going to do, because that's frustrating, ridiculous. And they left in a huff again. A couple of weeks later, my boss asked me to write down exactly everything that had happened, with no embellishments and approximate times. Turns out they were threatening legal action and saying I refused them service because I was racist. After reading my story and checking security tapes, the store said if they wanted to press charges, they'd see them in court and would back me. That was the last I heard from them. Fuck retail. I can never understate how much solace I get from knowing I will never have to deal with that shit or the miserable customers that roam its damned halls again in my life. I would literally kill myself before working retail again. Story 44. Back when I worked at CompUSA a year before they went bankrupt in 2007, I had to work Black Friday, so we only had to show up shortly before the midnight opening. The managers gave us the option of showing up at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day so we could get together, relax a bit, and take advantage of everything an empty store could offer. Some went into the training lab and watched movies on the projectors. Others went onto the sales floor and hooked up Xboxes for some Halo 2 LN action. On top of this, our managers provided us with plenty of caffeinated products like Red Bull and Starbucks Frappuccinos for those who wanted to stay awake for the whole pre-open time. Shortly before midnight, one of our managers flagged us down and told us to come up to the roof and check out the crowd. At our best guess, the line of people had to extend an easy 1,000 feet, blocking the entrances to all nearby businesses. This was at T10 minutes, and the line only got larger. Once we got all of our stuff packed up and stored in the break room, we all took our positions. The doors opened, and it was like watching sludge pour into a sewer. People were shoving and pushing themselves through the T intersection door, shoulder to shoulder, and damn near breaking the glass of the entryway. Within about 10 minutes, there was literally no walking space in the store, which made it a bit of a problem for those of us who worked at the camera and MP3-player counters. Normally, we'd have to walk the product up to checkout. As people filed in, we simply stuck Post-it notes to the items with the names of the customer attached and lobbed them over to the member service area and various checkout lanes. That's right, we actually had to throw the product just to get it to checkout. After a few hours, my coworker at the camera station noticed another coworker seemed to be missing, so I ventured out and tried to find him as best I could. 15 minutes later, I get to the break room storage room, only to find him on the floor, sitting cross-legged, fists in his eyes, rocking back and forth while having a full-on meltdown. Apparently, he had consumed 8 of the Frappuccinos and suffered a panic attack induced by energizing beverages. Once I worked my way back to the front of the store, we continued on. At some point, I think around 5 a.m. or 6, I heard some shouting at one of the checkout lanes and saw 2 of my managers book it out of the office and over to one of the registers. As I was told later, one of the checkout clerks locked up mid-transaction and fell backwards as if he was frozen solid. The 2 managers extracted him from the counter and took him back to the break room, where they later found out that he had intoxicated 4 or 5 Red Bulls within a span of 3 hours prior to opening. By 7 a.m., our relief shift showed up, and everyone working the night got to leave. Both of the employees who had collapsed were fine, having been taken away from the crazy shit going on at the front. Since then, I have never worked anything so chaotic in my entire life. Story 45. My friend had a foreign roommate her freshman year who appeared to be the best roommate one could ask for. She was quiet, clean, and rarely there. She also baked on occasion. The first semester goes by smoothly. My friend is loving life. College rocks. Midway through her spring semester, my friend starts noticing that sometimes when she goes to take her birth control each day, it's not always there. She chalks it up to absent-mindedness the first few times, but then she starts paying closer attention and becomes sure that she's not just being forgetful. The immediate suspicion falls on her roommate, of course, being that she's the only other person with daily access to the room. My friend has a casual talk with her, and her roommate seems confused and slightly offended that she'd even ask if she could be responsible. My friend believes the best of people and tries to shake it off. Weeks go by without incident until one day my friend returns home from a class that got canceled early. She walks into her room to literally catch her roommate red-handed. There she is on my friend's side of the room with a little package in her hand. My roommate doesn't have much of a temper, but obviously has no choice but to confront her then and there. Her roommate breaks down in tears and tells her that she got pregnant over spring break and is trying to get rid of the baby by taking birth control after the fact. My roommate is stunned and horrified. She ends up contacting the RA, who contacts the roommate's parents, who pull her out of school. No idea what happened to her after that. People are crazy. Story 46. My girlfriend lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with her friend. Both I and the roommate's boyfriend lived there. The girls were getting upset at each other, and things had been going south. Then one day near the end of a Walking Dead episode, we start talking about problems, and talking turned to fighting. Things were said, and he pulled a gun on me. I asked why he would do that, and if I had been threatening him by yelling while sitting on the couch. He never pointed it at me, but he did clock it. My girlfriend pulled me into her bedroom, where I called the police. When they got there, we had already gone outside with him alone in the other bedroom. When the police entered, there was a single gunshot, and he ended his life. We left that apartment and never went back except to move out. This is the reason why I don't watch The Walking Dead anymore. His girlfriend said he had been feeling in despair for months. This is why you get help. Help just means telling people, talking about it. I thought it was just for attention when the girlfriend said he was going to kill himself. It wasn't. It's tough knowing things could have been different, and it sucks more not knowing if it would have made things better or worse. I have accepted it wasn't my fault. I have moved on. But man, do I wish he would have mentioned it at some point. Even as a half joke so I would know it might be true and could help. Story 47. My best friend and I moved into the upper floor of an old mansion in the university town we lived in. I knew he had some depression issues and so did I. And we both drank a lot. But hey, it was college. I didn't know that he was drinking in the mornings or waking up in the middle of the night for more. I also didn't know until later that he was probably bipolar and unmedicated. Well, one night after some relatively heavy drinking, although we hadn't blacked out or anything, I went to bed. I woke up at about 5 a.m. to take a leak. I had to walk past his bedroom door to get to the bathroom. On the way back, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from under the door. I looked down and saw that it said, "I'm sorry, old toothless," in large, scraggly letters. Immediately, I began knocking on his door. Nothing. I pounded harder and yelled his name. Nothing. Now I'm really getting scared. I'm still intoxicated, but my mind is already working through what that could mean. So I took a step back, crossed my arms over my chest, and rammed the door with my shoulder. The lock on the door took the whole frame with it and shot splinters everywhere. But that didn't matter. My best friend was on the bed passed out. He has 6 8-inch long cuts on both wrists, and there's blood on the sheets and on his clothes. On the floor there are about 3 empty bottles of various pills, which sadly were mine, not his. A fact that took me a while to get over in stray capsules and tablets strewn about on the floor and around him on the bed. I'd been through the Red Cross first aid programs and tried to remember what to do. The first thing I did was grab my cell, hit 911, and put it on speaker. Then I grabbed a pair of dish towels and tied them around his wrists while I tried to prop up his legs and wake him up. I got little to no response from him. I stayed there talking to him, trying to put pressure on the cuts while at the same time picking up the pill bottles to show the EMTs when they got there. About 2 minutes later, an ambulance and 2 cop cars pulled up, and the medics came and got him out quickly while the cops questioned me and looked around. They found his knife, which they took for evidence, and took all the pill bottles I had collected. After questioning me for half an hour or so and getting my signed statement, they said they were leaving. I walked out of the mansion with the cops. By this time, the other people that lived in the mansion are awake and standing outside, and they told me what hospital he was taken to if I wanted to go or could call his folks. I told the cops that I was still intoxicated and couldn't drive. The policewoman that hadn't left said she'd take me there, but I had to sit in the back of the car. Thankfully, that is still the only time I've been in the back of a cop car. Anyway, she dropped me off at the hospital, and I sat by my buddy as they pumped his stomach and stitched his wounds. Luckily, he did a poor job with the cuts, and they were superficial, and most of the drugs were OTC and wouldn't cause permanent damage. I did have to hold him down while the nurses catheted him because there were no male nurses on duty, which was strange. Anyway, come 8 or 9 a.m., and I see that he's going to be okay. I step out of the hospital for a cigarette. I had to walk a decent way away because they are really strict about where you can smoke around hospitals where I was. So I'm sitting on the curb in front of the parking lot, and a nice white pickup pulls up in front of me. It's the female officer that brought me to the hospital. She gets out and hands me a brown paper bag. It's got all my buddy's stuff in it, including the knife. They had done all they needed to do with it, and she thought I should probably take it back instead of my buddy. Probably not protocol, but still a good idea. Then she offered to give me a ride back to my place. She was off the clock and in her personal vehicle, and the hospital was in the next town over. She didn't have to come find me there, nor did she have to give me a ride back, but she did. That was probably the nicest thing a stranger has ever done for me. My buddy made it through and briefly went to a program once he got out of the hospital. He moved back in with his parents, and I drifted away from him. Hard to explain why I did that, and looking back, I probably shouldn't have. But what he did really hurt me. Anyway, he did actually kill himself about 3 months later. All of our friends came over, and we sat quietly in my living room. One of our mutual friends, who had just gone through a really nasty divorce, started talking and crying. I don't remember the context, but at one point he stopped and said, "Gently, gently, gently." I don't know why he said it, and I laughed. I probably shouldn't have, and it wasn't a funny remark, but it just came out. I felt so bad about it. I got up and apologized to the friend that had just spoken, hugged him, and said I didn't know where the laugh came from. We all just cried. 4 years later, I can still remember the exact expression on his face, the exact sound of his voice when he said, "Gently, gently, gently." Story 48. During my senior year, I was roomed with 3 sophomore sorority girls. All of my friends wanted single-bedroom apartments, and I couldn't afford to do the same. Basically, I was nowhere close to having things in common with sorority girls. I'm very much an antisocial butterfly who would rather stay home and play video games, ignoring things completely. I don't like parties, never have, nor do I enjoy staying out late. However, these girls made it basically impossible to just ignore them. One thing to know before we go into details is that all 3 of them were friends at the beginning of my senior year, and by the end they all hated each other and only one still lived with me. The first one we will call Rochelle. Rochelle had a very sexist, very rude, very flirty boyfriend who spent nearly every day in our living room. This was easily sidestepped by just avoiding spending time in the common area, but soon the douchebag started eating my food, and not just eating some of it, actually opening new packets of lunch meat, cheese, eating the last piece of things, etc. All without asking. So I asked Rochelle if she could talk to him about not eating my food since he didn't even live here. She agrees, but nothing happens. It turns out Rochelle and her boyfriend were in a very real emotionally abusive relationship, which while I feel for her and would have been supportive, she was too much of a bitch most of the time to offer advice. He ends up cheating on her about a month into the semester for, I don't know, the 50th time, causing the other girls, let's call them Melissa and Bethany, to have an intervention of sorts. They talk to her about breaking up with her boyfriend, but that turns into a spiral of problems, which starts with Rochelle being absolutely fucking nuts about cleanliness. She makes a clean schedule which involves vacuuming every single day. I simply erased my name off the board where it was placed because I washed my own dishes as soon as I used them and never spent time in the common areas, so it was never my mess. She throws a tantrum at me, which I respond to by simply walking away, closing my door, and turning up music to drown out her screeching. The other girls have no real option but to deal with it since Rochelle is the BFFL. Apparently, I missed some drama that occurred between them over Facebook, but they essentially started passive-aggressively and loudly fighting. Rochelle starts having absurdly loud sex with her boyfriend while the other 2 are home. Bethany starts blasting really terrible music while this is occurring to get them out of the mood. And Melissa stops cleaning, which leads to a stalemate on dishes and fruit flies. One day I come home to all 3 of them crying and screaming in the living room. The next day, Rochelle has moved out. Melissa tells me a whole bunch about how Rochelle is failing all her classes. I already knew this since I watched the front desk of the academic probation office as an on-campus job that year and had a very awkward check-in with her one day. This is the first time I realized that Melissa is a complete bitch and a half, though, because she goes on a really long rant about not only Rochelle, but Bethany. Fast forward to around the end of the fall semester. Bethany starts having friends over at all hours, doing weird shit and being loud. Some mornings she has Bible study in our living room, which for some reason requires them to play guitar to some verses. Some nights she'll have friends over being loud, drinking and carrying on until like 4 a.m. when I have work the next morning. I talk to her about trying to keep it quiet, especially on Thursday nights when I have the earliest shift. This goes nowhere. I realize a little before Thanksgiving that this one girl is basically living in our living room. She's Bethany's friend, who I find out from loudmouth Melissa lives at home with her parents and is really just using our living room and a blow-up mattress to have sex with her boyfriend, who also still lives at home. Fantastic. Whatever, no big deal. Except Bethany leaves over Thanksgiving break and these 2 are still in my living room. More drama occurs over the break, as I find out later Bethany allows her friends to have sex in Melissa's bed while she's away. When Melissa finds out, she blows a lid, leading to more passive-aggressive fighting between Bethany and Melissa, and less sleep for me. Story 49. I was terrified of my freshman year turning out terribly, particularly that I was going to have a drughead roommate. So imagine my surprise when I come to school and find out that not only is one of my roommates a drug addict, but the other is a dealer. And I'm not just talking marijuana here. I would have been okay with that. This was a bigger problem. It became even bigger when I realized that they were in no way concerned about taking precautions not to get caught. No lighting incense, keeping wet towels on the door, hiding their crack pipes, etc. My university has a zero-tolerance policy. If you're in the room with it, you're prosecuted. So when the police, of course, got suspicious and started coming around, I met with them and explained that I wanted no part in all of this and that I had terrible luck being assigned to a room with these guys. Of course, this led to me trying to switch rooms, but university housing wouldn't have it. Sadly, they also had a strict no-moving policy, apparently even when I was in danger. They really wanted to ignore that there was a drug problem. My roommates knew what they were doing too. They figured out what I was doing quickly after the police showed up more often and after I called my RA, when one night a bunch of random people barged in and threw my intoxicated, high unconscious, and seizing roommate on the futon. Apparently, I was supposed to just let him die or something. So my roommates got sneakier and played quite a game with the police. The "you don't have a warrant" game. Eventually, this all led to the police telling me to call if there was a smoke smell so they could just barge in. It didn't take long for a smoke smell to pop up, and I left the room acting like I was going to class and gave a call. Well, I think one of my roommates knew what was going on. The dealer ducked out and left the building, leaving my other roommate there when the police showed up and barged in. They searched the room and everything, even my stuff, to make it look like I wasn't a snitch. But surprise, surprise, they didn't find much. In fact, I was told by housing that they didn't find a single thing. I was distraught because I felt like I just couldn't get away from all of this and thought it was just my luck that my freshman year had become a disaster. Then I looked at my voicemail. Oh boy, if there is a God, he pressed some buttons that day. When I opened up my voicemail, I found a message. A pocket dial of a 5-minute police search from my roommate arguing with the police over things that they found. That's not mine, that's not mine. That was all the proof I needed, and housing finally moved me out of there after months of denial after denial. That coincidental voicemail totally saved me. Story 50. I transferred to my final college halfway through my freshman year and ended up in the dorms with this kid whose old roommate moved out for better people. This kid was shy and very much a loner. He had one friend, a girl who lived 2 stories up. They weren't dating, but they hung out constantly. One day she got a boyfriend. He didn't like that. I arrived back at the dorm late that night, and one of the guys on the floor informed me that there had been an altercation. Other sources say he threatened her with a knife. So I proceed cautiously into my room, and he's in there talking on the phone, crying. I ended up going to bed sleeping with the only weapon I had in the room, a pair of scissors. Didn't know if I might have to fight for my life in the middle of the night. A few days go by. I come home in the evening after class and walk into my room. He is talking on the phone very calmly, but something feels weird. One of the resident directors knocks and asks him to come with her. One of the guys on the floor comes in and tells me that the cops had just shown up and were dealing with this kid. I ended up talking with his old lady interest later on, and she told me that she had her horse stabled in the equestrian area. I didn't even know my school had this, and that this troubled individual had harmed her horse, cut him up so he couldn't walk again. My roommate was apparently kicked out, and I had the room to myself for about 4 weeks until a new guy transferred in. Story 51. I worked as a red shirt for a GEW in the USA during the mid-2000s. I was pretty young, it was my first job, but damn if I didn't love that discount. 60% on in-store items, 80% on bits. I made quite a few very custom expensive armies while I worked there. Horror stories. My store was in a mall, so there was quite a bit of traffic through the area. I recall there being a pretty big guy that came in dressed in what seemed to be some gang attire at the time. The mall wasn't in the best area. He seemed off. Way too off. Gang dude has a smirk on his face the whole time as he acts interested in Warhammer Fantasy and has me run him through an intro game. He's giggling the whole time like he's hiding something. The guy was very obviously trying to pull something as he was trolling throughout the intro game. We finished the intro and I brushed off the experience. Afterwards, I went back to painting some of the army projects our manager had us working on. Suddenly, I began to smell shit throughout the store. The really fresh, hot, probably 8 Taco Bell kind. I walked over to where the gang dude had been standing and saw that he had smeared, hopefully dog crap, all over the footrest of the gaming table. I lost a little faith in humanity after that one. I had to clean the crap by myself, as it was a one-man operation for that store on a Friday night. GW is known to have ex-military employees, and they usually end up working the retail stores as managers. This was my manager at the time. He was an all right guy, but my God, did he have a short temper. He comes into the store maybe an hour after opening and goes straight to our back room. He shouts something about the terrain being messy and how we're fuck-ups with the terrain in the back. I barely hear this, but I can make out what he's yelling from the back of the store. Thank God no customers were there, because he then starts to reorganize the terrain very, very loudly. By reorganize, I mean throw the ultimate man-baby tantrum. I've never seen a full-grown adult, let alone ex-military, pull a scene of this scale. The manager yanks every piece of terrain down from the shelves, about two 10-foot walls of shelves, each 10 feet long, so a lot of terrain, and starts throwing them to the other side of the room. He's literally throwing orc fortresses, huts, custom buildings, cairns, you name it. He's throwing it. They're starting to pile up as he's reorganizing the terrain because we didn't do it right. I'm sure we threw out about 70% of the custom terrain in the back because it was smashed beyond recognition. We had to clean up a lot of that mess because he took off from the store not long after. We spent the next few months making new terrain. I had to laugh when maybe a week later his truck's tailgate was stolen. It definitely wasn't right to laugh, but I couldn't stop chuckling at the thought of someone sitting there in a mall parking lot wrenching on this dweeby truck's tailgate. The karma was perfect. Now for the brighter side. My favorite memory from working at GW was spending the day hobbying with a very sweet crippled man and making a friend. This guy just absolutely loved Lord of the Rings and he couldn't get enough. I don't think he'd ever been into models, let alone heard of GW, but I could see it in this guy's eyes. He saw the Momok from Low TR, the mega elephants, and he was so sold. I ran him through an intro game, but he didn't really need that to sell him. It was icing on the cake. We proceeded to buy every single Low TR model that interested him, as well as hobby supplies and the mega paint set. 2 hours later, and we're $600 deep in models and paints, tools, and glue. This guy was in heaven, and I was having the time of my life. We proceeded to spend the rest of my shift working on those models together, and I indeed made a friend that day. I was honestly feeling a little guilty because I thought the LOTAR models were overpriced and weren't competitive at all. It just didn't feel official compared to 40K or fantasy. It didn't really matter though, because to this day, I remember how elated that guy was to have a person helping him discover a new way to interact with his favorite story.